Creepers and Geekers. Chris, the Atari Creep here. Hey, what's going on, everybody? If you follow me at all throughout any of my little YouTube's history, you know that one of the main things I really enjoy about this retro gaming collecting and what have you is I love the wacky history behind a lot of the stuff. If you refer back to my Atari 101 videos, I did one on the 2600 cartridges, and I talked about how competing companies were making software for each other and just a lot of nonsense that just would not happen today. Well, today's topic is not only no exception to that, but it's one of my favorite stories in this whole thing. And how unfortunate it is that companies do some of the practices that they do, that wasn't even English, and how what could have beens turn out to has-beens and not bees. And in some ways, it's for the greater good, and in other ways, it's a shame. For example, Atari has a long history of dropping the ball, whether it be pausing on hardware or just screwing it up left and right, and getting greedy and trying to produce crap too quickly, and they're basically blamed mostly for the video game crash of 1983 and 84. That's another video altogether. I doubt we'll ever touch on it unless you really want me to. It's fairly well documented. Nintendo, again, no exception. They were notorious for working with other companies and then backing out last minute because of either greed or what have you. Great example of that, Sony. They wanted to work with Sony to make a CD attachment for the Super Nintendo. They backed out because they couldn't come to an agreement on licenses and what have you. And Sony went off to make the PlayStation and dominate the world. And Nintendo kind of, But I find it very interesting that in Nintendo's early offerings to North America in consoles, they reached out to Atari and actually bending over backwards to work with them. And what could have been the saving grace for Atari turned out to be another one of their downfalls and inadvertently becoming the saving grace for the video game industry. So let's tap into this. I'm going to screw up a lot of names. I'm going to try not to give you every corporate person's name, whatever. I'm just going to give it to you creep style, and hopefully you can take from it, and I do it justice. So let's get into this thing. So here it is. What if I were to tell you that this bad boy almost had an Atari symbol on it? It may not have been this exact physical console, but back in 1983, if you don't know anything about this thing, there's enough history out there, information. It's good. It's worth playing with. But back in 1983, a lot was happening in the video game industry. The sparks to the crash were really starting to snowball. Atari was showing some losses, and they were scrambling in their shoes to try to save the day. Meanwhile, on the other side of the pond in Japan, Nintendo had come out with the Nintendo Famicom with a great list of games, and they were doing really well. So Nintendo wanted to reach out of Japan, but really didn't have any way of distributing, say, in North America. So Mr. Yamauchi, I think it is, he was the president of Nintendo, basically told Howard Lincoln, who was the chairman of Nintendo of America, why don't you reach out to the Atari people? Let's see if we can't work a deal out with them. And of course, Howard Lincoln called Ray Kazar, who was the CEO of Atari at the time, while they were being owned by Time Warner, and set up a meeting. And it made sense. Atari, yes, the crash was coming, and Atari was failing, and stocks would go down, and all kinds of crap. But they had a name in the industry, and Nintendo was fairly confident with their product that regardless of probably what was going on, now this is speculation now, that was going on, that their product was strong enough to revitalize that market here. So a meeting was set up. And in that meeting, I'm just going to keep it short, it was agreed that Atari would, one, make the hardware for the system at low cost. Nintendo would back them up with the software, with Atari feeding royalties, a great amount of royalties back to Nintendo. So the deal seemed pretty solid. Everyone seemed happy, and they decided to get together after it was completely drawn up Now it's June 1983, Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago. Atari's walking around the floor and they notice that Coleco is demonstrating their Atom system using the game Donkey Kong. The problem with this is, one, Atari had the rights to release Donkey Kong for their home computer systems. And yes, Coleco did make it for the Atari 2600, the cartridge. They never got permission from Nintendo to release it for their own systems. So Atari seen this and they thought maybe Nintendo had backstabbed them, bamboozled them a little bit. So now they're pissed. Nintendo shows up with their contracts and deals and what have you, and instead of being met with hugs and kisses and handshakes, they're met with an angry letter from Ray Kassar basically saying this deal can't happen now, and I might even take legal action against you. So, of course, Nintendo goes scrambling trying to fix all this. They meet with Coleco telling them, look, you need to stop distributing and to demoing it with this game. End of story. We didn't give you permission to do that. Fuck you. Then they had an internal meeting with the president of the United States, really. The president of Nintendo held a meeting. I believe it was with Nintendo of America because it's duly noted that he spoke only in Japanese. And he flipped out on them. I guess he was just screaming and yelling, and again in Japanese. And even I would be terrified. Howard Lincoln said at the end of it, he was quoted by saying, I was scared. But he goes on his rant, and then the translator at the end, instead of just saying everything that he had said, just said, he's angry. So they try to make the deal with Atari, and they're trying to soften the blow and all this stuff. Meanwhile, in the Atari camp, Ray Kassar gets caught with insider trading. About a week or so later, Warner Communications decides to let him go, though it was officially announced as a resignation. Ray Kassar was the hub of this whole deal. So with that all happening, and a number of other things, the deal kind of started to be put in the back burner and slowly fizzled away. For one reason, of course, Ray Kassar wasn't around anymore to facilitate it, but Atari was also working on another system called Maria, which turned out to become the 7800, that they were planning on distributing in 1984. Atari wasn't taking this deal with Nintendo too seriously, though they probably fucking should have. They planned on doing it for a short period of time, and in true Atari greedy fashion, in a way, they were going to basically only do the deal to keep money coming in so they can get the 7800 out and lock Nintendo from selling to the rest of the world, because they would have to go through Atari. And we all know how that ended up turning out. So that's basically the story in a nutshell from the Creep's point of view. What are your thoughts on this? Me personally, if it had happened, just think about this. I think the hardware would have been strong enough that it could have maybe prevented the crash a little bit, but I think Atari's practices probably would have fucked it up anyway. And we wouldn't have the beloved NES. I joked about it in the beginning, making it like it was not a big deal. But at the end of the day, the video game industry just imploded here in North America because of our practices. And though some of Nintendo's practices were illegal, their stronghold on third-party developers and such, it revitalized the market, and we wouldn't have had this iconic piece of hardware that we still to this day love and cherish. And I know some of you sleep with it next to you on your pillow. Me personally, it's a thorn in my side because I like Atari and Sega, and Nintendo overshadows all of it. But that's great because there was a ton of excellent games that came out for it. I did have one growing up, and it was an iconic piece of hardware that saved the day in the end. So it's kind of good that Atari and Nintendo weren't able to meld, because I honestly believe Atari would have fucked it up to the point where Nintendo probably would never have been able to make something else. My point of view, what is your point of view on that? Do you think if it had gone through, Nintendo would be who they are today? Or do you think Atari would have just loused it like I think? Or do you think that it's good that it didn't happen? I do. I think it's fantastic it didn't happen. We wouldn't have had the systems from then on out had it happen. So, guys, thank you so much for again listening to my rants and raves. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, put a thumbs down. All feedback is positive to me. Leave comments if you wish. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. I really appreciate it. So, guys, until next time, I hope you enjoyed this installment of Atari 101. I talked about Nintendo more than anything. And until next time, I hope everyone's doing well. And this is the Atari Creep signing out saying,